Thank you
All
so
right.
much for joining us for another episode of Solicited Advice. This is the show where we actually are asking the questions around the things that we want to work on personal development. So I'm excited to have a guest with me today, and we will get into how we connected in his book and things of that nature. But first, I want to wish everyone who's in America happy 225th. This is a wonderful time for us to show gratitude for ourselves, for our citizens, and just really take a moment to pause. I do want to give a special shout out to, let's see here, I had the card here. Sherry Durbin. I have a connection who sent me this hat in honor of just celebrating America and all about branding. You know, I'm the person that talks about branding. It's important for people to really embrace their brand and to give themselves a voice. So, Mom of 15, I think that is quite an appropriate tagline to put on this hat. So, I just want to shout out Sherry because she actually has Up Late Stitching. It's a custom embroidery service. She's the actual person who made this hat, and she's got lots of services. So I'll put that in the chat. But I do want to honor my connection who wants to stay anonymous. Thank you, thank you, thank you for so much for thinking of me. Now we're going to get right into our guest for today. Dr. Robert and I got connected through a mutual connection, Nikki Hernandez, and he has been hosting these conversations on Clubhouse. Clubhouse is a social audio app, and we've been diving into chapters of his book, and it has just been an amazing opportunity to kind of change your perspective around psychotherapy. So I'm excited to have him today just so we can have this conversation around his book, around the takeaways that he wants us to get from his book. But before we get into that, I want to yield the mic to you, Dr. Robert, for you to introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Robert Gillespie. I'm a clinical psychologist by training, specialized in neuropsychology and trauma during my career and brain injury for a very long time. Uh, and I just published a book on many of the cases that I worked on over 40 years. And the club that LaChelle and I are part of goes over some of the chapters in that book each week. It was sort of a labor of love, and also gave me a chance to sort of talk about ideas in psychotherapy that have emerged for me over my career, but particularly the Sullivanian idea of we're all human, we're all the same.
Mhm.
The worst of my patients was me. I could see myself in them,
It's
and so yeah.
Well, I love the way that, these conversations that we have, they're not real threatening. You know, sometimes when you're talking about trauma or things of the past, people kind of want to avoid it.
Mhm.
They don't want to go too deep per se, but you really have a great way of connecting people around such an important topic. So, we were talking before we went live around this book being like a 4-year project.
Mhm.
So, what advice would you give people that are in your position to kind of um, make it understandable or relevant for the everyday person?
Um, I think it's interesting as a psychologist. I don't actually prescribe psychotropic meds, but every one of my patients probably was, but with very few exceptions, were on those medicines. I spent a lot of time explaining it to people in
Mhm.
everyday language, and trying to have people understand, for example, medicines, what a medicine is doing for their brain, why it would help them with the particular symptoms that they're bringing in. Well, it applies to everything else too. I mean, when people come in, they come in with pain,
Mhm.
depression, anxiety, sometimes mania, sometimes addictions, things that they're struggling with. And they're frightened usually in the beginning. The decision to come see somebody like me is a big decision. It's not something everybody does every day. And I always admired the bravery of people to be willing to come into the psychologist's office and begin talking about over time, their darkest secrets. So it takes a lot of courage to do that. The everyday advice is, it's funny, I was thinking about what I learned when I was working with Mercy, the Mercy system in St. Louis a while back. I was doing brain injury work for them as a consultant, and we had this group of adolescents, young people, and a lot of them got injured in foolish things. One guy got injured car surfing. Who would car surf, right? Others motorcycle accidents, and a lot of them motorcycle accidents. And so I remember I had this discussion. I was saying, once you have a head injury, your probability of having a second head injury is pretty high. You should think twice about riding motorcycles. And they all were going crazy against what I was saying. And then one of a young woman in the group looked at me and said, "Dr. Gillespie, it's quality of life." And I remember thinking, oh, heavens, this is what this is all about. It's about people coming in. People are coming in. They have hope. They want to change things, and they want to improve the quality of their life. And so those young people taught me something that day that I have taken with me for a long time.
I love
So
that. Yeah,
yeah.
because I think about, so many things I'm learning about myself as we are diving into the chapters of your book. And it is really a great feeling to be able to have a normal conversation around some very medical,
Mm-hmm.
scientific, knowledge. It just, there's a scientific name that you could say to a lot of this stuff, but then you also could bring it into layman's terms for the everyday person. And I think that's so important. And a lot of times there are people that are suffering in silence because, for me, I think back to my own state of depression that I was in. I didn't have the words for the emotions that I was feeling. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that's kind of common for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one of the things you mentioned in your book is how, you were dealing with people that had PTSD and everything before it was even a thing. So,
Right.
for people who are dealing with being a pioneer around things that not everybody has the knowledge of, it's new, what advice would you give them around, you know, perseverance and still staying strong over something that a lot of people that can't resonate with what they're doing.
So over the years, if you come to a cocktail party with my wife and I, who my wife Astrid has been with me for 50 years.
Wow.
We met when I was working for the government. She was working for the government when I was an investigator. But she delights in telling people how I've changed my positions over the years, and theoretically. And uh, she's right. So my advice to people is be open to to different ideas that you may not understand at that moment, but later on you will come to understand differently. I often think of, I guess this goes back to the idea of psychotherapy. I think of psychotherapy. Oh, it's funny, there were these 4 rules that came out of working in rehabilitation therapy with people with brain injuries and spinal cord injuries that applies to all therapy, as it turns out. One, it's hard. You're asking people to look at the devil, to look at the hardest things at probably the worst time in their life also. The second principle is there's no time off. When people come to my office, they may be in an acute phase or a residual phase or something, but they're suffering, and you don't get a day off. It may wax and wane a little, but you don't get a day off from that. The third principle that emerged was it's a process of reinvention. And everybody starts in the office from where they are that day when they come in, and with the resources that they brought to the table that day, and you work on moving from that point forward. But in order to do it, in my experience, has been people. The reinvention isn't, oh, I'm no longer Bob Gillespie, I'm somebody else.
Hmm.
It's I see it differently.
Yeah.
I can see, and I see myself differently over time. And so that's a process. And then the last principle that I think is important is giving back. Because if
Mm.
you once you've achieved whatever the stasis is that you're trying to achieve in therapy, if you can help somebody else, it validates what you did for you.
Mm.
And so I think of my advice for people is, be open to seeing things differently, and that, have kind of have an open mind about things, and be willing to change your position if it becomes very clear that the position you're holding is not functional. So
I love
hard to
that.
do, by the way, hard to do.
It is. I think back to a lot of beliefs and things that I had to overcome.
Right.
I matter when I do everything right, right? Or, I have value. Just having to let go of some of those thoughts growing up as a kid, as a high
Mm-hmm.
achiever, and transitioning to, okay, good. Having it done is better than having it done perfectly. That's quite a mindset shift.
Mm.
So I love that point that you bring up about the reinvention. How do people kind of start that process? Because, yes, it's about beliefs, but, a lot of times we're like, okay, I see myself as successful. I want to do it tomorrow. So what are some realistic things that we could tell people to start that journey of reinvention?
um, I was thinking about that. I thought we might talk about this morning, and I was thinking about there's a very interesting story, some of which I think is apocryphal, but
Hmm.
when Freud, who, Freud in the beginning of the 20th century was the dominant figure in psychotherapy and psychiatry. So Freud was old, and he was living in London in World War II, and he was dying. He was dying of cancer, and a reporter came to him and said, "Dr. Freud, you've told us all about how people are crazy, all about the bad things that happen. What's psychological health?" Which is a great question, right? Because we never ask that. We always ask the opposite question: what's wrong, right? As
Right.
opposed to what's right. And Freud says, "Oh, very." I presume he said it in German, but he said, to love and to work," was what his answer was. And it's reported that his competitor, Carl Jung in Switzerland, said Freud always gets it wrong because if you're not having fun, it's not worthwhile. And so he
Mm.
added into that equation fun, that
Mhm.
you have to be able to love, to work, and then to enjoy things, right? And then the Americans heard this and they said, the problem with that definition is it's too static. It's like what that means over your lifetime, the dynamic of it changes. Sometimes you're focused on work. Sometimes you're focused on relationships.
Mhm.
Sometimes you're focused on just having fun, right? You're on vacation. Um, so my advice to people is look at it, when you look at your life, is there a balance in your life? Do you have
Mhm.
meaningful activity? That would be work. Uh, do you have people that know you and like you? Family, friends, whatever. And are you enjoying your life? Do you have enjoyment in your life? And so that would be simple advice to give people.
Mhm.
When I look at the end of therapy for people, I'm always looking at, did we get what's their balance now? Now that's going to change. If you're taking care of children, you're going to be very focused on relationships and work and stuff, and you may not be having as much fun as you did before. But so that kind of the balance changes depending on where you are in your life.
I
But
love
so
that.
that idea of psychological well-being as a balance is I think an idea people would be helpful for people.
And I even think that's a good concept because, I think
Your silence.
oh, you can't hear me?
I can't hear you.
Okay, let me see here. Gotta love technology. Okay,
Yeah.
we have one viewer. Can you hear me now? Not at all. Wow. Let me see here.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yeah, I can't hear you though. Oh, interesting.
Can you hear
Huh.
me now? Gotta love technology, guys, I tell you. Um, yeah, I can hear you fine.
Uh, maybe I should try something on my end.
Okay, you actually, what you can
I'll
do
try it.
is you want to go out and come back in. Let's see. Gotta love this, guys. Thank you so much for being patient. Technology is sometimes not our friend. So we are going to let him get that together. I'm going to put a little note here in the chat around he can go out and come back in.
Can I hear you now? Can you still hear
Can
me?
you? I can hear you.
I still can't hear you though, Michelle.
Okay. Maybe you can go out and come back in.
Say what?
You can go out and come back in.
Oh, okay.
Okay. We'll try that.
How
Okay.
do I
So
how do I do that? Let me see.
there we go. All right. Well, I want to thank y'all for watching. This, you got to be ready. Okay. In season, out of season. That's just how it is with a lot of this technology. I'm not sure what happened. I am not the tech person for sure at all. I'm going to invite him to come back and we'll introduce myself. I'm LaChelle Adkins, also known as America's Supermom, mother of 15 children, and glad to be here to have these conversations around personal development and ways that we can. Can you hear me now? Okay, now let me see. Now I can't hear you. Now I can hear you. I can hear
Okay.
you now.
The gods of the computer were mad at us for a moment.
I love it. I love it. You got to be ready for anything. Okay.
Exactly right.
Here we are. This is the part about having fun. You never know when
Yeah,
you're going to be called to have fun, right?
that's exactly. And if you can laugh about it, you're doing fine.
That is so true. That is so
That's the
true.
other thing to say about psychotherapy is uh, I think people think it's a much more serious. It's a very
Yeah.
serious process because you're dealing with people's pain, but there's a lot of laughter in psychotherapy if it's working right. I mean, there's tears. I mean,
Yeah.
there's these moments, but there's also I think people forget there's an awful lot of I mean, I found myself with patients laughing with them at stuff. Not so it's there is this other joy in it for
Yeah.
people.
I agree. I the first thing I had to do was learn to laugh at myself, right? Because I was such a person who felt like everything had to be perfect.
Hmm.
And to be able to embrace mistakes and laugh at them, that was really a game changer for me.
Right.
So a question that comes to mind for me is thinking about all the different traumas that you're exposed to and the different patients. How do you kind of keep yourself grounded in the midst of all these different, traumas that you're working with these clients on?
So I think partially I had 8 years of psychoanalysis before I even went to graduate school. When I was in the government, I had great
Oh,
insurance and paid for 3 times a week, and I was in a group. Uh,
hmm,
that so I think that gave me resilience to deal with it. I think it's also knowing a balance. And when I was an intern, my first months as an intern, uh, so I had left the government, cashed in all of my pensions and savings bonds, and went to graduate school. Right. So I get to graduate. You're in graduate school. You're in academia for 3.5 years. Then you get to be an intern and you get to go practice. And I'm ready to practice. So I hit the VA at Newington on the run.
hmm,
And about a month into it, I would come home on Friday and I was having anxiety attacks. I was like I had the heebie-jeebies, right? And my wife finally, after a while, said, "What the hell's going on? What are you doing? This is crazy." And I said, "I don't know. I'm having these terrible emotional reactions going, a lot of anxiety." And she said, "Well, you got to sort that out." And I'm thinking, "Oh God, I've made a mistake. All this journey to be a psychologist and psychotherapist has been the wrong direction for me. I'm not really able to do this. It's why I have all this anxiety."
hmm.
And I have just spent 5 years of my life and left a career with the government and I made a mistake, right? So I go into my supervisor on Monday, Dan Daniels. Daniels was my supervisor for 5 years, and part of the answer to your question is I had really good supervisors who taught me how to deal with the traumas that I was having. My reaction to the trauma. But I go into Daniels and I say, I'm having this anxiety attack. I think I got to drop out of the internship. And he goes, oh, yeah, yeah, Gillespie. It's we've been talking about you. He said, nobody does that much psychotherapy in a week. You got to cut back. And I go, oh, and I cut back and the anxiety goes away. And I'm thinking, there are boundaries I have to learn about this.
That's
So,
true. I mean,
yeah.
I think do you find that when you're going through these moments with your clients that it's therapeutic for you as well as them?
I learned something from all of my clients about everything. They changed me. I even had a patient that had schizophrenia who was had all these delusions about zombies, and over time, his courage struck me.
Mhm.
I'm going, wow, this young man has tremendous courage to be able to be in a world where he sees these frightening things all the time, and he still keeps trying to have a job and have relationships,
Mhm.
and so I I admire the struggles of the people that I work with, and I always it always I in none of their struggles do I find to be alien that I don't like. Wow, how could anybody do that? Now I do have moments where I go, wow, how could anybody do such an evil thing?
Right.
Particularly with sociopaths, but even them, if you listen to the story, you can. It's actually not, it's not such a mystery. It's just terrible how they got to be who they
Right.
were. But I think other people going through the same meat grinder might come out quite similarly. Although the other thing is, our nervous system has 96 billion neurons. That's an
Mhm.
amazing number.
Mhm.
Each neuron can connect to 10 other neurons to make a circuit. So that's trillions of circuits, right?
Right.
Among each of us, you have 96 billion, I have, and those neurons learn from experience. But what your nervous system learns and what my nervous system learns will be slightly different because we're in different settings and we have different experiences, right?
Mhm.
And so that's why no two people are really alike. So when everybody comes to my office, it's like, oh yeah, I feel depressed, and then you listen to the story, and it's like, oh, that's a unique version of this.
Mm.
And in order for me to help you, I have to understand your unique version of this. And we have to come to an understanding of that. Actually, I have to help you to come to the other person to come to an
I love
understanding of
that.
it.
Yeah,
You know,
no, so, just hearing that dialogue, it just brings to mind for me, how do you get people to trust you? Like you mentioned in the room the other week around the person seeing zombies and even referred to you thinking you might have been a zombie. So,
yes, yes.
what is the key you think for people to build trust, for people to have the confidence to share what they're thinking?
Um, I think I think partially it's contrived, actually.
Hmm.
Uh, uh, um, uh, 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 you come to see so somebody will come to see me in an office, so they've
Hmm.
already got that kind of. One of my old colleagues said, says doctors wear white coats. They can be really bad doctors, but they still all wear white coats, and you think they're doctors, right? It's like,
Right.
why is that? Because it builds up a certain trust. And he said, you walk into a stranger's office who's wearing a white coat and has a stethoscope and plaques on the wall, and he
Hmm.
says, take a pill, and you do.
Right.
Right? Why? Because of the setup. I mean, people kind
Hmm.
of. I know why I'm there. I made a
Hmm.
decision to come to see you. Right? So there's partially that. So there's the setup, and you want to make the setup very non-threatening,
Hmm.
but also at the same time provocative. Like my office had a lot of pictures that patients had at different stages had done at different stage
Oh.
has significance, and they sort of were designed to provoke people's interest a little bit. So
Mhm.
you want people to be curious because that helps them. If they're curious and you're helping them with their curiosity, it's almost a natural kind of tour guide thing. Oh, he's taking me on the tour of the cathedral here, and I'm going to follow him, right? A
Mhm.
bit. There's that, and certainly that they know you're a professional, and you're hopefully you're acting professionally. There's all of that. That's the setup. That's the setting. Uh,
Mhm.
I think it's really, you know uh, 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 I always ask patients almost the first thing once they sit down, tell me what brought you here to see me.
Mhm.
What's your why are you here? Why do you want to talk with me? And then I listen for a long time at that point,
Mhm.
to the story, and I will listen for years to the story. I mean, and people. The one thing about therapy is that it's a layering process. You're
Mhm.
often talking about the same material again and again, but at a much more deeper level. And then what I see happen in the process is uh, patients are always leading me. I don't come into the room with very many assumptions about the
Mhm.
individual I'm working with. I come in with a curiosity of I'm about to discover a new person. Maybe a person who sees zombies. That's fine. This is what you do, right? What his experiences. Maybe somebody who's depressed. I had a woman who was so depressed and having an affair, totally out of character for her, and she's trying
Mhm.
to sort this out, right? And I'm curious about it. It's like, tell me more about it. And I'm not particularly judgmental about it because I don't understand it yet, right? And
Exactly.
right. Um, the other thing from my practice over time is that I always think that when patients come in to see me, there's these two dimensions to what's going on with them. Because by the time somebody's willing to come to see me, there's been a lot of options already gone through. But I don't think going to see a clinical psychologist is the top of anybody's list on a Monday morning of what to do. You know, I think Starbucks might be first, but
Right. Right.
right. And so it's a big deal. By the time people come to see me, they've made a whole lot of decisions, and they're probably feeling a little bit desperate
Mhm.
to do it. Um, but what I always am aware of is how much when people come in and tell me what's going on with them, there's these two dimensions. One is a dimension that's voluntary. I did this, or I'm doing that, and it's not working, or I'm upset about it. And then there's this involuntary part. I'm not sleeping well. I'm anxious. I
Mhm.
am. I can't regulate my mood. You know. Now that has a very strong biological, neurological component. And when somebody comes into me, it's almost my gut tells me that early on in the process of treatment, I've got to address those involuntary symptoms, help them address that, get that as under control as I can get, like particularly sleep. If people aren't sleeping, you've got to address that issue because it corrupts everything else that you're doing. Now, once you've got that kind of biological stuff stabilized, it opens the door to all of the voluntary stuff that people are doing to cope with all of that involuntary stuff they've been experiencing.
Mm.
And oftentimes the strategy over time is the coping strategies you were using weren't effective for you. They weren't providing relief. Therefore, we got to come up with better coping strategies or better strategies to deal with it. A lot of that is a whole phase of, do you know what's going on with you?
Mhm.
Do you recognize when you're beginning to feel sad, or you're beginning to feel obsessive, or you're beginning to feel anxious? Because that's when you can intervene. But
Mhm.
it's like, and often you're teaching people, they kind of know it, but you're making them know it in a way that they can control it.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, very, very insightful. I really appreciate that. Because you have to be. willing to look at yourself in the mirror a lot of times. And I love that point about sleep. That was one of the things that kept me in the cycle for 13 years, was that I was not getting any sleep, 3 or 4 hours, but thinking that, that was normal. That was
Right.
my normalcy. And it has you thinking crazy. Just because you have sleep deprivation. A lot of
Yeah.
people
Yeah.
don't realize that. It's like a domino effect. You make a
Hmm.
bad decision, then have consequences to that, and it just keeps on going. And it also
Right.
can affect your physical as well. Now, so you mentioned a lot around people having courage to come
Right.
and talk to you. So when
Right.
we're thinking about just across the board around fear, I think I had a lot of fears around people knowing my story, oh, I went through depression, or I
Hmm.
was thinking these crazy thoughts or whatever. Um, Part of that is doing it afraid, right? I feel like I never really, and even still today, I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of things that make me afraid to talk about what I experienced. So, what advice would you give people around? you know, uh, Using that fear as fuel instead of, allowing it to paralyze you.
Um, well, it's obviously ultimately one has to face that fear. But
Hmm.
when you face it, is I mean, I think it has to, again, it has to be in the right moment, in the right setting. Um, uh, uh, when I was an intern, I had a female patient who her mother had committed suicide. Mother was had a parent schizophrenia, was a brilliant engineer, but got parent schizophrenia and committed suicide. And I was initially treating her for the depression around that, and uh, I was treating her for a year as an intern, and then I continued treating her when I was a consultant. And it was at the beginning of the second year that she came in and said, "Okay, now I'm willing to tell you about the abuse I was exposed to."
Mm.
And I remember thinking, "Wow, it took a year for that patient to be ready to tell me that." And that, of course, was a very powerful thing in her therapy, right? Uh, uh, and I find it is not a fast process, psychotherapy, right?
Mhm.
Uh, but how does one face one's fear? Well, there are different. I mean, you can face it in the office with me eventually. I think you need. I don't like the idea of people. We are social beings, and the idea of facing fear alone is not a great idea. I think ultimately you have to. It's an individual process, but I think sometimes having collaborators that you trust
Mhm.
can help you face. It's that, hey, can I talk to you about this? A good friend maybe
Mhm.
you can do it. Now the difference between a friend and a psychotherapist is I'm not going to probably have pizza with you, but uh, although sometimes I might they bring it to the office. But the so there's a difference in that. But what I find is that when people, it was funny in the group. Nikki was saying, "Oh, what happens later to
Mhm.
these people?" And most patients, I don't know. They end therapy and they go on with their lives, and I don't see them again. Occasionally, I will run into a patient in the community or for some reason. Uh, but what I hear when I do talk to them is that they took their therapy and they helped other people.
Mm.
They took their fear, their pain, and morphed it over time so that they could help other people with they
Mhm.
became so sensitive and understanding of it. You know, I think if you're in therapy for a couple of years, you're probably a therapist anyway.
It's
You know, uh,
it's true. It's
I mean,
true.
it's a learning process, right? It's not like, oh, you know, you don't learn something. I often thought when I have teachers in who are patients, I often go, they should teach all of us psychologists, teachers. We should train to be teachers so if we can teach people how to learn. They
It's
don't
true.
do any of that for us. We learned how to do therapy, but we don't really learn about learning as a process. So
Yeah, I think that is powerful because that for me, that's what happened for me. It was like I had this calling to help people who experience,
right,
what I went through and help them avoid it, with just strategies and tips and things of that nature. So, definitely resonate with that. Now, we were talking also that this was a 4-year journey with this book.
right,
And please share with those that are listening, because some people can be on the verge of writing a book and think, oh, this is taking too long. Maybe this isn't even supposed to be written. So talk to us around, that 4-year journey. What was going on? Was it just the way that the book was written? Was it just time to collect your thoughts? Because a lot of people feel like it should be, oh, write a book in 30 days. You know what I mean?
right. And I wish it had happened in 30 days. That would be fun. But uh, it didn't. Yeah, I thought it was going to be quicker than it was, than it actually happened. I kind of wrote out the framework of these stories. Originally, the book was going to be called "It All Begins with a Conversation," because that's how I think of therapy. Uh,
Mhm.
so I wrote these stories out, and then uh, I have a son who has a PhD in English literature, but he's now running a computer company as the world turns. Right. Uh, 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 he was saying, "Well, you have to get somebody to, you have to get an agent or a publisher or something." And then through my wife, I met, introduced me to Nikki,
Mhm.
and I she agreed to. She said, "Send me the first chapter, and I'll see if I can be your editor." Well, that process was brutal. I mean, so I would send her chapters. She would go over them, and she would send them back to me with comments. And
Mhm.
sometimes she would just outright change the language because it didn't work, and I thought that
Mhm.
was great. But she would come back in comments and say, "You got to think more about this." Uh, in one story that's in the book about this woman who had erotomania and pursued me and pursued my wife and I, uh, she kept saying, "What was your wife's thinking?" And I'm going, "Oh Lord, I got to explain what my wife is thinking. That's like a risky endeavor to begin with, you know." Uh, but it was like things like that I had to think through, and
Yeah.
then the other part was, I don't know if anybody else who's writing has this part. I would It would get in my head, and I couldn't sleep at night. I would be writing this book in
Mm.
my head at night, and
Yeah.
and sometimes I'd have to get up in the middle of the night and go down and start typing because if I didn't, I wouldn't be able to sleep. Right,
Right.
and so that was part of it. Uh, and the other thing was, it, we went over the book several times in
Mhm.
toto, so it wasn't just a one read through. It was, I think it was must have been four read throughs, four or five
Mhm.
times we went through. The other thing that Nikki had was beta readers. These are people who just read it and made comments, right? And they were very useful because it's like, oh yeah, this doesn't make any. I see it doesn't make any sense. I've got to either put something in or take something out. The last thing is, the hardest thing to do as an author is to take something out of your book
Mm.
because they're your children. I mean, it's like, I'm emotionally connected to it, but that's the editing process, and it's like it helps it be a better read if you eventually take stuff out. So, but
Yeah.
that'll be in the second book.
I love that, because, people see that, oh my gosh, they're a published author, they got this book done, they're speaking, they never really understand the journey behind the book, a lot of times. And, we hear a lot of people that make it seem like it's such a simple process. Now, I think it also depends on the content that you're writing about. of course, in terms of the journey, the experiences of the different people that you're highlighting. So,
Right.
not every experience is the same, but there's a lot of people who feel like, hey, I've got my brand. All I have to do is just write a book. It's done quick, and everything works out, and I'm riding off in the sunset. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So I think it's really important for people to kind of understand that it's a process, and a lot of times we try to skip parts of the process in order for it to be a successful endeavor. So,
I think you need a
what
collaborator too.
I love that.
I think Nikki was excellent for me. Was an excellent collaborator outside of my system because I have
Mhm.
I have children and family that were interested in what was going on. But a collaborator is different, and I think it allows you to reflect on your own creative process.
Mhm.
That's like so.
Yeah, and I think, because you're gifted in the writing. I mean, it was your experience. And so having another set of eyes or someone else who can help challenge you and get the best out of you in terms of that, I think is so important. I think another thing, when you mention collaborator, is that a lot of people feel like, oh, the book is done, I've accomplished it, but then you've got the marketing of the book, right? You've
Right.
got to get out
Right.
there and share about it. So, you definitely
so,
need a collaborator, you know what I
so
mean?
when we started out on this process, uh, uh, early on in the process, Nikki said, "Oh, you have to have a website." And I go, "What? No, I'm not a public person." And she says, "What are you talking about?" And I go, "Well, when I worked for the government, there were people that were trying to off me. I don't want those people to
Oh.
know where I am." And so then she said, "When was that?" And I said, "Well, it was in the 1970s." She goes, "How old are these people that are?" And I went and said, I think I've been living without thinking about the time that's passed since these events happened.
I love it. I love it. See, things like that, right? We can get in our own head. I love it.
Uh, in my office, I had one of my patients a while back was a photographer and who had had a
Mhm.
stroke. He was a photographer art dealer who had a stroke, and I was helping him recover from the stroke. But in the 70s, he had been like a photographer for events, right? and
Mhm.
and and he had a picture that he gave to me that he had taken of the Grateful Dead in 1970
Oh.
in St. Louis.
Uh-huh.
Jerry Garcia with dark hair and thin in the Grateful
Wow.
Dead. And I had
Yeah.
it in my office partially because I made me remember that patient who was a very unique kind of guy. But I also, the Grateful Dead had this saying called creative collaboration. And I
Oh.
always thought that for me is psychotherapy. It is this
Yeah.
creative collaboration between two human beings uh, to work on something that you've agreed on. And so I always like that idea of creative collaboration. So,
I love that because that's what I find. I resonate with you saying it begins with a conversation because
right,
when you have a conversation, that's the opportunity to really co-create something.
right.
You reinvent together. I mean, it's just a great energy. If you got the right person that's willing to do that. So, conversations are very comfortable for a lot of people, and you can get a lot accomplished when they have that mindset of
Yes,
being a collaborator. So love that.
right.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Now, what takeaways would you like the readers to get from your book?
Oh, the first takeaway is in the title. It's that marvelous saying from Harry Stock Sullivan that we are all simply human than otherwise, and we have
Hmm.
more in common with the least of us than any other living thing on the planet.
Hmm.
Uh, and when you're dealing with, as in the book, I describe fairly severe pathologies throughout the book, or uh, 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 you know, everything from schizophrenia to brain injury. It is remembering the humanity of us all is helpful. I think the other takeaway is again uh, um, the first question you should ask yourself is do I have a balance in my life? And
Mhm.
if not, how can I achieve that? Um, uh, there was a book written a while back called by Andrew Weil. Andrew Weil was a physician out of Brown, I think, and he
Mhm.
retired and traveled the world looking at health systems. It was at a time when almost the ACA was coming into focus, and we were looking at how do we manage our healthcare system, right?
Mhm.
And he wrote a book called Seven Steps to Health. And I remember getting the book, being very excited because Weil was kind of famous at the time. And I go and I get annoyed reading the book because one, the seven steps are not in the first page. It's like you got to read 100 pages into the book to get to the seven steps, right? And then the first couple of steps are exercise, diet, sleep,
Mhm.
and I'm going, I had to buy a book to that's pretty basic. But his fifth item I liked the most, and it was worth the price of the book. He said, "And don't listen to the news because it always makes you feel helpless." And I keep thinking, yes, you know,
Yeah. That's
you know,
that was the first thing that I gave up after my last hospitalization was the news. It's been like 10 years. Now, you see clips and with the
yeah, yeah.
way
You
social
can't get
media
away from it,
is.
right?
You can't,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
to actively sit down, turn it on. I mean, it really has limited my even watching TV because I don't watch the news anymore.
right,
But I think it's that way to kind of be more intentional with your state of mind. Because what
right.
I noticed when I would think about my depression was I'd wake up and I'm like, I have a list of things that I want to do. And then I would watch the news, and then I'd be the unpaid news anchor going around telling everybody what I saw on the news. And totally my day is derailed, right? Because I'm going around telling the news.
Right,
So I figured that really it changed my state. I wouldn't be productive, a lot of things. And I was the one that was the catalyst for this. So I love that point. And a lot of times we minimize sleep and diet and
right.
exercise,
So
for our mental health.
So that whole idea of the balance of meaningful activity, social positive social relationships, and fun sits upon physical health. If
Hmm.
you're ill, that's going to suck up all of that energy, right? Or if you're
Yeah.
if you're not healthy, right? So I think what you're saying, diet, all those kind of fundamental things that we need to pay attention to. Which, if we're anxious or depressed or traumatized, that's often the first stuff that goes.
Yeah. True.
Right? People are not paying attention. In the book, I talk about that when I was working with the VA in my internship, they didn't have mental health clinics; they had mental hygiene clinics,
Mm.
and it was actually significant because there was in America in the beginning of the 20th century there was this mental hygiene movement,
Mm.
and it was all about. It originally started about in Chicago and New York in slums where they had the people who were ill, and but
Mhm.
they were seeing a lot of mental illness as a result of those social conditions. So there was this mental hygiene movement that was very popular in psychiatry, and the guys that created the VA system after World War II had been influenced by that, so they named their clinics mental hygiene clinics. But I often thought mental hygiene. I made a joke about it. I said it's like you brush your teeth or something. It's like
Mhm.
it's like, hello, I'm suicidally depressed. Well, if you brush your teeth every day, you'll feel better. It's like, well, maybe not. Maybe we got to be a little more sophisticated than that. But I do think the idea of hygiene, of taking care of we don't think about it.
Yeah.
Am I taking care of myself mentally? And,
Mhm.
and what am I doing today? I mean, I take my medicine to take care of my blood pressure, diabetes, or whatever I got. But what did I do today to take care of my mental health?
Mm.
And do I have a routine, just like I have a routine to take care of my body? What do I do to take for health? So
It's so true. And I think a lot of times, people notice that something's wrong because of that. Oh, the person they normally are well shaven, they haven't shaved in a couple days,
right,
or,
right,
they're always getting their nails done and now something changes. Those are kind of like red flags to let people know. for those that might be really far gone,
Well,
because there's a
I
lot
only
of
have this.
people.
So
Yeah.
my wife is an executive for a newspaper. She's a lawyer who's a labor lawyer for newspapers and has been
Hmm.
that for. And she works now for a newspaper company that owns uh, more than 100 newspapers. So she travels around the country solving labor problems and all sorts of problems. Right, high stress job.
Hmm.
During the week, she does what we now call maintenance. She will get her hair done. She will get a facial done. She will get her nails done. She goes to exercise. She goes to Zumba. And I look at that and I go, mental hygiene. This is how
Yes.
somebody who's in a high stress job, not even having, you know, some kind of mental pathology like anxiety or depression or something, but just stress.
Yeah.
Um, and you need that's hygiene. Are you
Yeah.
taking care of yourself? When I was in practice, I was the doctor who golfed every week because I had friends
Hmm.
in town here who weren't connected with my world at all, which I loved. They were
Hmm.
not. They were not psychologists. They weren't even. They were just guys that I happened to know, and they were golf buddies. Once a week, I would go out and golf with them. And you wanted to be my patient the next morning because I was pretty energized, right?
I love
But
it.
again, I think the question to ask yourself is, am I taking care of myself? Because if I
Yeah.
don't take care of myself, nobody else is going to take care of me.
Exactly.
You know?
And it's going to come off with how I take care of other people.
Yes, yes,
So I love that. Because we talk about making sure your cup is full and, you're not coming from an empty cup. But a lot of times, I know in my case, my cup was empty and I was thinking that I was pouring into other people, but my emptiness was what was being transferred to other people rather
right.
than an abundance and fullness. So, really appreciate that insight.
Yeah,
So,
just to spin off of the point that you just made,
yeah.
I think one of the things that made me effective as a therapist was optimism.
Mm,
I don't care what people brought to my office, the exception of sociopaths. I wasn't so
mhm,
optimistic about those people, but most of my patients, I always thought, we'll get through this. Not only will we get through this, you'll be better at the end of this. It'll just get better. You got to, and there's a moment. I used to use the image from Aladdin,
mhm,
the Disney cartoon movie Aladdin.
yeah,
There's a scene in it where Aladdin and the princess have just escaped from the marketplace, and the guards are chasing them,
mhm,
and they run up to his hovel, and they look out the window and they see the castle, which means different things to Aladdin and the princess. But
mhm,
then the guards come up, and he knows how to get he knows how to get away, and he says to the princess, "Trust me." And they jump out the window together, and the adventure starts. Right? There's a moment in therapy where I think the patient says, "I trust you." It
mm,
may not be the first day. It may not. I had a patient drop out for a year and
wow.
come back and say, "I figured out what I was getting here. Now I want to come back and do
Mhm,
it." I just think you have to be. I think a therapist has to be optimistic for people, no matter
mhm,
what. Uh,
mhm,
um, and but I think people have to. It's the thing you were pointing out before. It's a matter of the trust is such a crucial issue
yeah.
at some point. And how do you
I
get it?
love
I think you're there for them. That's how you get it. There is no trick. It's not like, well, this is what I do to get trust.
Exactly. I think that is really good what you shared because when they're coming to you, that feeling of optimism, because there's so much talk around therapy. Oh, everybody needs it, but nobody wants to go. Nobody talks about it. That's why I'm very vocal about my experience with depression because yeah, we have all the statistics and we need to get out there and talk about it, but nobody wants to talk about it.
Right,
So
right,
having that optimism, I think, is so important because it really can help them get more comfortable and feel safer around doing something that maybe no one in their family has ever done, in
right.
terms of getting help.
Having worked all over the country, I will tell you, the attitudes towards mental health vary widely by geography in this country. If
Mhm.
you're out on the West Coast or in New York City, uh, uh, seeing a therapist is more acceptable.
Yeah.
I remember in the Midwest, I had a close friend who was living up in Wisconsin, and he said, "Bob, you're a psychologist. What do you do?" And I say, "Well, people come to my office. I talk to them, and they have problems, and we work on the problems." And he goes, "Why would anybody do that outside of the family? I mean, why would you?"
Mhm.
It was almost like it didn't fit their worldview,
Yeah.
and I think that there's much more stigma in the middle of the country about
Mhm.
mental health issues than there are on the coasts. I think
Yeah.
it's not one uniform culture about this issue,
Right.
right? Yeah. And
And
so
people embrace it. The more that the problems with not taking care of your mental health are, made worldwide and known, then people begin to embrace it. It's kind of like, oh, I can understand your pain when I go through the pain, but
right,
not until, you know.
not
So,
yes, right. It's like yeah, yeah.
not until, yeah.
What is it? Walk it off.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Well,
Yeah.
this has been just a wonderful time. I want to thank
Oh,
you for even going past our time. I could talk about this all day. I think it's so refreshing and
apparently I can as well. So,
I love it. I love it. So, what final thoughts and share the name of the book? We've talked about it,
oh,
but we didn't even quite say the name. I'm going to put the link to your book in the show notes, but share the name of the book and any final thoughts.
the book is entitled "Shared Humanity: A Field Agent's Journey into the Human Mind."
Mhm.
Uh, I, I I guess the thought I would end with is the thing that struck me for whoever I was dealing with, from people with schizophrenia to brain injury to spinal cord injuries to trauma, and uh, uh, um, just remember we're all more human than otherwise. We're all 99% the same.
Mhm.
Uh, but each of us has also a unique path that we followed, and each of us should be respectful of the other person's path, and try to understand it if you can. And
Mhm.
these days, this is very, very hard, given the kind of the cultural moment we're in, where there's
Mhm.
so much divisiveness, and people are not listening to each other very much, are now almost afraid to talk to each other, right?
Yeah.
So I just think, if you remember that the guy, this person, even the person you don't like the most, has more in common with you than any other living thing on the planet.
It's
You can
true.
remember that, it makes life a lot easier to deal with.
Absolutely. So
Yeah.
Jim Iverson is watching and he says
Oh,
hello.
oh, hello,
And
Jim.
Nikki, of course, Nikki's
I
on
hope
as
you're doing
well.
well.
Nikki's on too. She's joining us and she's making some comments and sending us hearts. So we want
Okay.
to thank her for joining. But this has been a wonderful dialogue. And then they can follow you on Clubhouse. You're there Wednesdays at 11:15 Central on
11:15 Central,
Wednesdays.
12:15 Eastern.
Okay, so
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
Wednesdays, they're on Clubhouse.
Wednesday.
So,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, we'll be sure to put the link there. But
Right.
great opportunity to really dive into a lot of the cases within
Yeah.
your book, but just having a organic conversation around it and really sharing some insight for many of us who struggle with a lot of these things and seeing the human connection with ourselves and family members. So,
And
really,
I want to
really
thank you for
wonderful.
the opportunity to have this conversation. This has been for me very, very wonderful. Thank you.
Oh, you are so welcome, and we'll have to do it again.
I'd love to.
I'm telling you, I would love it. So, oh yeah, Nikki mentions that all the Clubhouse replays are on your Substack.
Oh,
So if
yes.
you guys are here on Substack, you can follow Robert's blog, and all of those replays to those conversations are there.
Yeah.
Um, so thank you again.
Thank you, LaChelle. I enjoyed this tremendously. Thank you again.
You're welcome. Well, look, you have an amazing day. Thank you,
Enjoy the
Nikki and
fourth.
Jim. I know.
And I Yes, happy 250th to all of us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Well, you have an amazing holiday and
You
we'll
too.
talk to you soon.
Take
Bye,
care. Bye bye.
everybody. Thanks for watching.